Hey everyone, this is Jay, and welcome to my March reading wrap-up. I did a bit of traveling in late February, and what that means is that I have unlocked a new background. Check it out. Pretty nice, right?
Anyway, on to the books.
The first book that I finished in March was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I actually picked this one up because I needed to read Mandel's second novel, The Glass Hotel, for my book club in March, and I heard that though her books are all considered standalones, she tends to write in Easter eggs to past books, so I wanted to make sure that I read them in order. Essentially, I ended up with a self-imposed double book club. This is a speculative literature novel following a group of people linked pre-apocalypse and how they reconnect post-apocalypse. The apocalypse in this case is a essentially flu variant that causes a global pandemic. Sounds familiar, right? But this book was published in 2014. This was a very beautiful story and was very, very pleasant to read through. It tackles themes of grief, resilience, and self-identity. Though each character's connection to one another is often tenuous at best, you can feel how important that connection is to each of the characters. Taking that even further, how important it is to feel connected to something at all. The only character that really felt disconnected to me was the Prophet, as I didn't fully understand his point thematically. His narrative felt jarring overall, since he was clearly just there to add drama to the plot as opposed to actually build any concrete statement towards the themes. I ended up giving this one a strong 4 stars. Pretty soon after I finished Station 11, I could feel a reading slump coming on really strong, so I decided to just flat DNF 2 of the books that I was in the process of currently reading, because I could feel myself actively dreading picking them up. The first of those books was The Josset Heir by Sara Hashem, the first book in the Scorched Throne series. This is a romantasy novel and is very common for the genre, reads like a YA. It's about a girl with magic in her veins who is trying to survive in a kingdom that has outlawed magic. When her magic is discovered, she has to work with her sworn enemy to bring down the kingdom. My main issue with this book was the dialogue. Something I've noticed a lot in fantasy lately is that all the characters the reader is supposed to like always have some kind of witty little quip ready to go at all times. While I like witty quips as much as the next person, when it gets to the point where everything that the characters say is a witty little quip, it's too much. It makes the characters feel extremely one-dimensional and unrealistic. A lot of the times the quips take me out of the moment or will mess up the tension of a scene and prevented me from getting a good flow while I was reading. Outside of that, there wasn't really anything especially negative or positive about it. I just couldn't really bring myself to care. I realized that I was just reading because I felt like I needed to and not because I was enjoying myself. So instead of just continuing on, I decided I'm just going to quit here at around the 10% mark. The second book I put down was The Lady Traveler's Guide to Scoundrels and Other Gentlemen, what a mouthful, by Victoria Alexander. This is the first book in the Lady Travelers Society. In this one, the heroine's aunt has gone missing while on a trip arranged by the suspicious Lady Travelers Society. The heroine embarks on a mission to find her aunt with the help of the hero, who is the society's supposed ringleader. This one was just really boring. The stakes were way too big for the book's tone. The characters never seemed to give the problem of a missing person the gravity it deserved. This is especially true of the heroine, who had an extremely grating personality on top of that. She's touted to be this hyper-rational, smart, capable woman, and we are blatantly shown what feels like the opposite every time she's on the page. I understand that main characters are supposed to have flaws, especially in romance. They're supposed to have flaws, and they grow as the book goes on, but I resented her enough that I didn't care. I didn't want to see it. I just wanted to not read from her point of view ever again. Additionally, it's supposed to be an enemy to lovers book, because the hero's the ringleader that caused your aunt to go missing, blah, blah, blah. But there's no chemistry whatsoever between the two leads. I know they're supposed to be enemies, they're not supposed to like each other, but a good enemies to romance does have some kind of romantic tension in there, and nope, not a zilch. And I was 36% of the way through the book. I honestly can't believe I'm saying this, because I almost never ever say this about a romance book, but the hero deserved better. It's especially petty because I do remember really liking some of Alexander's earlier works, but I don't know, I think it might be time for me to part ways with her new stuff because it's just not hitting. After that, spring came to my neighborhood, which meant the flowers were blooming, the birds were chirping, and the trees decided it was my time to die. Essentially, it is now allergy season, and I am suffering brutally. So yeah, I apologize for how my voice sounds. There's not really much I can do about it. It's very raw right now. My allergies tend to manifest in an extremely stuffy nose and sore throat. So I'm gonna sound bad for a while, unfortunately. To tide me through it, though, was the only book that I didn't DNF during my purge, which was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This urban fantasy novel is about a Dine monster hunter who must track down who is setting monsters on the loose before they kill more people in a post-apocalyptic Navajo nation. This one was super fun. I don't think it did anything groundbreaking, but that made it all the more fun to anticipate what was coming next. The big twist regarding the main side character was painfully obvious, but honestly knowing what the reveal would cause, like the upheaval it would cause, made it all the more dramatic when it actually came. Now, to be perfectly honest, I haven't read very many indigenous stories or authors, so the insights into Roanhorse's take on Navajo culture were completely novel to me and very engrossing. A caveat here is that honestly, I don't have much exposure to this culture though, so I am easily impressed. Grain of salt with that one. The main character was very flawed, but she was also a very sympathetic character, and she rooted the story quite well. Her motivations made a lot of sense and really drove all the decisions and choices that she made throughout the book. I did think the ending was quite rushed, though, to the point where I'm not even fully sure what happened or why. However, it was overshadowed by a rather major cliffhanger, so it's pretty easy to look past. I do admit, though, that having a cliffhanger like that at the end of the book is a bit of a cheap trick. I did definitely fall for it, though, because the second book is still on hold at my library, and I can't read it yet, which is very frustrating. Overall, I gave this one a low 3. After that, I started reading books one at a time. I was trying to avoid picking up too many at once and getting back into the slump. It only kind of worked, but I picked up The Bandit Queens by Parini Schroff. This was a thriller literary novel, I think. I'm not really sure how to categorize it. In this one, a woman's husband disappears years ago, and her whole village thinks that she killed him. Now other women in her village want to kill their husbands and need her to help them do it. This book is a romp. It was surprisingly humorous given the subject matter and maintained that tone throughout. That's especially pertinent as the book deals with violence and abuse towards women both systemically and personally, so the tone really is what made it readable and enjoyable without just dragging on your emotions constantly. The main character has clearly been hurt very, very badly in the past, and the story did a really good job of showing her growth and really endearing her to the reader as the story continues. We're really able to understand where she's coming from, how she got there, and all of the choices and changes she makes throughout the story really feel all the more victorious because of it. In fact, I would say that all the women in the book were compelling and displayed complex motivations and relationships between one another. In contrast, almost all the male characters were very one-dimensional and boring. I'm pretty sure that this was intentional, though. I think the author wrote them this way, so I can't necessarily say the book would have been better had the male characters been given more depth. But I'm also not really sure that it would have suffered if they had had more depth. It does get pretty preachy by the end of the book. The main character pushes the moral of the book, which is obviously woman empowerment, incessantly by then, but at the same time there's no real change within the society, so it feels somewhat groundless and kind of pointless to preach it that hard. Additionally, things wrapped up a little too neatly considering how much murder and mayhem occurred, but I do admit that the ending did suit the overall humorous and lighthearted tone, so I'm not sure if something more gritty and realistic would have done the rest of the story justice. I did really like this book a lot and had so much fun reading it. I gave it 4 stars. I know this is the author's debut, so I am very excited to see what she ends up writing next, and I'll most definitely pick it up. After that was Sign Here by Claudia Lux. This is a family drama about a family who is falling apart under a demon's watch as he waits to capitalize on their souls. Surprisingly, also kind of a weird twist between a thriller and a literary novel, and also very, very similar tonally to The Bandit Queens, which was a delightful surprise. The book centers around a demon who comes across as a very good person, regardless of the fact that he is a demon in hell. The juxtaposition there was absolutely delicious, and you really find yourself rooting for the main character throughout the entire book. He really roots the story in a way that none of the other characters do. The other demons in Hell were also very compelling and entertaining, especially Cal, who was named after Calamity Ganon, a fact that my partner, who had not read the book but is a huge Zelda fan, did not like. I thought it was very funny though. All the other characters in Hell were very much just caricatures of annoying people in the real world. I always really like the idea of Hell as a place where just mundane annoyances build up to the point where it's intolerable, and this book definitely does that. Outside of the demon's perspective, there were also portions from the family's perspective, but as you may have picked up on by me not talking about them much, I didn't find them as interesting. In fact, I found those portions to be quite standard and nothing I hadn't read before. This book was a very fun popcorn read, and I sped through it. I give it a high 3, and I would highly recommend it if you have a free, lazy afternoon with nothing to do, and you just want something quick and easy and thoughtless and fun. Here you go, this is the book. I then finally got back round to The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This is a literature novel about how a Ponzi scheme affects all the people wrapped up in it, both directly and tangentially. As I mentioned earlier, I had to read this for my book club this month, which is why I read it so soon after Station 11. I normally take more time between books, at least a month, but this time I didn't have that luxury because I needed to read it ASAP. While it does have the Easter eggs I was promised, in fact, one of the recurring narratives is an Easter egg, I overall regret reading this book in the order that I did. The Easter eggs really could have been fully enjoyed in any order you read the books, and the rushed reading of the two books, one right after another, really backfired for me. Mainly because this book just was not nearly as good as Station 11, with weaker characters and a much more mundane plot. I really think the crux of the issue really stems from how meandering the narrative was. The beginning and ending felt pointless and completely divorced from the meat of the story. Some of the characters and events that we're following in the beginning and end of the story just have no bearing on the actual pertinent parts of the story. This resulted in the story feeling really aimless and disconnected, unmooring it from any themes or meaning that St. John Mandel was trying to impose in it. I really wish the story had been more centralized on the Ponzi scheme, which, when paired with St. John Mandel's beautiful prose and poignant character work, was actually quite riveting, but alas, we had a lot of buffer both before and after. I ended up giving this one a low 3 stars, and it actually made me less interested in Sea and Tranquility, which is a real pity. I think I will still read it, because some people whose opinions I do trust still liked it, but there's a lot more hesitation to pick it up now, so that sucks. After that, I picked up The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. This one is a fantasy novel about a woman leaving a very mediocre life who receives the Book of Doors, which essentially allows her to teleport. Now she must run and protect the book from evil forces that would take it from her. To be honest, I thought this book was super flat. The characters were flat, the plotting was flat, and the world was pretty flat. On top of that, I felt like I'd already read this book. It reads like a cross between The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Heir and The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, except both of those books I thought were better and more engaging than this one. Full disclosure though, I did not get very far into this book. I put it down after 50 pages. I think it was around 13%. I tried to convince myself to give it another chance. I was like, I'm gonna read another 50 pages, just, see where it's going. But I just couldn't bring myself to actually do it. I really did not want to keep going. I thought it was boring and I felt like I already knew it was gonna happen. So what was the point? So I just didn't. I put it down. I personally would recommend reading The Starless Sea if you felt a craving for this kind of story instead. It's just really a pity because this was a anticipated release for me, and I really love the motif and theming around doors as a literary device, so I'm really sad this one just didn't do it for me. I then finished off my last book for the month, which was The Cloisters by Katy Hayes. This book is a dark academia thriller about a girl who is sucked in by the allure of the New York City Metropolitan's Cloisters Museum and getting more and more embroiled in the toxic people she becomes close with while working there. This is a polarizing book. People either love it or hate it, with very little in between. I fell in between though, so I'm very middle of the road with this book. And while I found a lot of the critiques to be accurate and agreed with them, I also agreed with the people who liked it and found certain strong things in this book. I think where the book falls apart is by trying to be both dark academia and a thriller. By trying to do both at once, the book doesn't really adequately do either. My hot take is that I think a good dark academia book is going to lean more towards the literature side than it is going to reach towards the thriller side, even though a lot of the subjects in dark academia books do lend themselves to thrillers. I thought that it started pretty strongly as a true dark academia novel. It's slow, it's pretentious, it's very insular and myopic in its focus. The book is more engaging for its atmosphere than anything happening in the plot or characters. Frankly, I really like this portion of the book. It gave me very strong, kind of the last tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chokshi, atmospheric vibes, not in the fairy tale sense, but kind of the aloof, intriguing way. The thriller half is where it really just fell off for me. It started following the thriller genre conventions that I'm just not a huge fan of. It went from this really slow, meandering pace to just rocketing along plot-wise, blowing past plot points and events without even close to the level of detail or interest that had been taken in earlier portions of the book. This especially proved an issue when the plot took liberties regarding acceptable academic practices, which are completely disregarded by the end of the book, and some of the conclusions make no sense in an academic setting, which when juxtaposed with the original research behind this book, it just didn't mesh. Finally, like any true thriller, there was one really big twist at the end, and I'm gonna be honest, I didn't see it coming. However, it wasn't in a good, cathartic, like, oh, way. It was in a, huh? What the hell are you even talking about way. The twist had no bearing on the story whatsoever and really snapped me out of it. It came out of nowhere, in my opinion, and did nothing. It didn't add anything. It felt pointless and just like the author was trying to do a cheap trick to get you to gasp. Overall, this was a low 3, but I think it would have been higher if it stuck with the dark academia throughout and didn't dissolve into just a really messy, poorly plotted thriller. And those are all my reviews for Mark. There were 2 other books that I did read, but both of them were rereads of some of my favorite books, so I didn't feel the need to issue out a new review because I wasn't really parsing through any thoughts for them. They were my favorite romance novel of all time, which is Love in the Afternoon by Lisa Kleypas. I usually do an annual reread, and mine just happened to be this month. And then I'm also working my way back through the One Piece series. I have been up to date with everything as it came out, up through the Wano arc, but now I'm not getting as much out of the weekly format, so I'm trying to take my time with it. I'm slowly accruing all of the different omnibus volumes. So right now I just finished the second one, which covers volumes 4, 5, 6, and I'm working my way through the third one, which covers 7, 8, 9, but I'm going really slow, so I don't expect any kind of serious timeline here. But I just wanted to mention that I did read them. Man, this month was slumpy. Oh, it was so rough. Hoping next month is better, but we'll see. I just really didn't read very much in the beginning of the month. On that note, going into next month, I am currently reading Murder by Degrees by Ritu Mukherjee, Leviathan Wakes with James S.A. Corey. And this one is a bit of a conundrum because I am listening to it via audiobook from my library, and I'm listening to it with my partner. So we're listening to it whenever we have time to listen together, which isn't very often. And this is a 21-hour audiobook, so it is taking forever. We're like 50% of the way through and have 4 days left before I have to return it to the library. Needless to say, that's not going to happen. So there's probably going to be a very long hiatus between starting and finishing this book, because there's 5 people in line for this book after it inevitably gets back to the library. So I'm going to have a hiatus in the middle, which kind of sucks. I'm also reading what was supposed to be my nonfiction for March, but I just haven't gotten very far in it, which is The Revolutionary Samuel Adams by Stacy Schiff. This was recommended by my partner's mother. It's not something I think I would have picked up on my own, but I am reading it for her. That being said, didn't get to my nonfiction this month, unfortunately. I imagine starting a nonfiction, at least, is better than not at all picking one up. I'm trying to justify this, but we'll see. Maybe I'll read 2 in April or something. I'll figure it out. And finally, I'm reading The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. For stats this month, like I said, it was very slumpy. It was a very slow month for me. I only read 8 books and DNF'd 3. I did, however, read 3 owned books, which is best month so far for that, so that's good. I want to keep that up. And read 5 from the library. As far as genre goes, I read 2 fantasy, 1 romance, 2 mystery, and 3 literary fiction. And had ratings of 2 low 3s, 2 high 3s, and 2 4s. Very middle of the road reading month, with an average of 3.5. In regards to crafting this month, not too much of an update. I didn't do any sewing this month. Don't know how I feel about that really, but yep, no sewing. I did, however, start a new knitting project. So that's really exciting. I've gotten quite far with it. I've also realized knitting is a lot faster than cross stitch, which is not something I really ever tangibly thought about, but it is. It just goes by way faster. Maybe it has to do with the scale of the projects you're working on, but cross stitch projects take me months, and knitting an entire sweater maybe takes me a month and a half. It's not nearly as long. So I did also figure out that if you're looking to pick up a crafting hobby, cross stitch, you get the most bang for your buck because it takes forever and it's by far the cheapest hobby I have. By far, including reading. And that's everything from me for the month of March. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you again next month. Bye-bye.